Hello there, everyone. Welcome to Fired Up. My name is Morgan McLintic, and today we're going to be talking about best practices in PR for the cybersecurity sector. The world of PR is constantly changing, but nowhere is it evolving as fast as in the cybersecurity space. So we'll be joined by Nick Lagalante, who is the founder and CEO of Fractional 360, a consultancy specializing in PR marketing for cyber, and has had a long career in this space. And I'll be talking to him about best practices on how to use your labs team, how to use all that great data, how to establish your CEO and execs as thought leaders. How do you work with influencers? So this is a fascinating topic, and I'm really looking forward to diving in deep on the best practices for cyber PR today with Nick. So please join me in welcoming him to Fired Up. Nick, hi. Welcome to Fired Up. It's great to see you.
Oh, it's great to be here, Morgan. Thank you.
Well, thanks for joining us. And so today we're going to talk a little bit about cybersecurity PR, and obviously you're an expert in that. And sort of top of the show here, can you just tell us a little bit about what makes cybersecurity PR different from PR in other tech sectors?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think what makes cybersecurity PR different from other sectors, especially other tech sectors, is the unpredictability of the attack surface. You just never know, right? What's going to happen, what threat actors are cooking up next. And PR practitioners, whether you're in-house at a vendor or you're at an agency supporting a vendor or you're solo, whatever the case is, you kind of have to have 1,000 eyes on 1,000 things at once. In the news cycle, you have to be paying attention to threat vectors because if there's a major breach or a major security incident, all of a sudden now, 6 months of PR planning for proactive outreach and brand building could just get thrown into the wayside. And now you have to interact with your crisis comms plan and engage all these different areas. So I would say you got to keep 1,000 eyes on the prize because you never know what those threat actors have up their sleeves.
That sort of rapid response, breaking news stuff is just far more important than in other areas of tech. And we'll go on to talk a little bit about best practice there because you know that's going to happen. You don't know when it's going to happen. So I want to talk a little bit about the preparation there. But this whole sector, cybersecurity, has had so much investment over the last few years. We're seeing massive exits in terms of the acquisition of Wiz, for instance. Eyes are really on this space. It's very hot. How does that momentum, would you say, sort of really change the narrative for companies that you work with and space in general?
What I think is interesting, if you look at the cybersecurity marketplace for the last 10 to 15 years, like large swaths of investment and high velocity merger acquisition activity and cycles has always been a big part of our industry because of the nature of security. You have a lot of point solutions that fix certain problems as the threat landscape evolves. And so those point solutions get gobbled up and so on. I think in the last 5 years since COVID, we've seen a dramatic drying up of some of that activity. Obviously, the market has changed. The world changed from COVID onward. And, you had collapse of Silicon Valley Bank and things like that. And that sort of dried up, I think, a lot of investment in the cyber market. There was a big push for platformization from vendors and things like that. So that groundswell of acquisition activity and investment rounds just kind of died down and really focused on who's got the big platforms. Companies like CrowdStrike really rose to the cream, right? And were able to solidify their brand during that time. Zscaler did the same because they had a perfect remote security solution when the world was going remote. What we're seeing now, to your point about these acquisition cycles, is that cyber is back this year in a big way. And you're seeing things like cloud security take front focus in these acquisition and investment cycles. There's no surprise why Wiz had that massive or has that massive exit in play with Google. And I think from a PR point of view, what's interesting is that it's always been a problem, Morgan, for practitioners. If you're not at one of these companies releasing financial news, how do you make the most of that? That could be tough. And so a couple of ways I think that you can do that if you're not a Wiz or you're not a CrowdStrike and you're not putting huge earning releases or big acquisition news out there, number one, is there something your thought leadership can talk about so that you can become part of the conversation? If you're a startup in an adjacent industry or you're a Wiz partner, for example, you have an integrated model with Wiz, talk about it. Talk about the acquisition. And rather than letting that news consume your PR plans, pivot so you can get into the conversation, and then all of a sudden some eyeballs will get on you. The other thing is, if you have really good product news to share or really good research always rises, right? In terms of what journalists are interested in writing about and covering. And so now's a good time during these big financial announcements, lean in on your research. Can you be first to market with a zero-day threat? Can you talk about something that your team is seeing that no one else is seeing? And even if it's not directly part of the conversation, even if it's adjacent, you'll still have a better chance of getting some eyeballs and cutting through the noise.
Yeah, that's great advice. I mean, we always say, hey, if you're a startup, a scale up, what is it that you know that nobody else knows? And I like your point about, okay, I'm a partner with CrowdStrike or Splunk or, any, large public company. What are we seeing that might then sort of suggest what the fortunes of that large public company are? Are they getting adopted more? Is it slowing down? What is changing there? And that might be the thing that that can get you into that conversation. So I think that's great advice. With the funding, I do think that there have been, everyone's trying to carve out their little space in cybersecurity. And you do see these little categories sort of pop up and go away. Like I'm thinking API security, right? All of a sudden, lots of companies came up and they've got a lot of funding. API security is, hey, somehow different than your traditional firewall or what have you. You saw big investments there and a few exits. So people are trying to carve out their niche, but not all the categories sort of reach, momentum. And so they come and then they sort of collapse down. So I'm interested in your view about category creation. Is it something that you recommend to companies because it does take an investment? Or do you like, okay, let's find something else that we can slipstream behind?
What's funny is I worked for a little bit for one of the most successful and market-defining category creators in our industry and probably in all of tech marketing. Jennifer Johnson, I spent some time as her skip level at Tenable. So she's a big proponent of category creation. She's an amazing category creator herself, big into the play bigger community and that whole sort of methodology. And that was a really cool experience because Tenable was going through a category shift away from traditional VM and really defining and building cyber exposure as a category. Now you have exposure management, which is that evolution of it recognized by Gartner. But Tenable really put their plant in the ground, 6-7 years ago with cyber exposure. So I think it really depends. It depends on kind of where the brand is and where the business is in its life cycle and what is going on in that market. If you have a legacy vendor or a legacy cyber market or product set like VM, it's probably time to start thinking about what is the next category so you can redefine yourself and stay relevant in that market. If you're up and coming, you might be able to define a new category just because it hasn't existed yet based on threat vectors. I'll give you an example. There's a company that just launched this year, and I find them really interesting. They're one of a handful of companies. They're called Herd Security, Herd, and they are focused exclusively on deepfakes. And so there's a whole nother subcategory that crosses phishing, ransomware, where the deepfake tech is at the centerpiece. No one's doing that and focusing on that. And I saw at RSA this year 4 or 5 different companies. So it's always a gamble, Morgan, right? But I think you got to think about where you are, where are the dollars flowing in the go-to-market, and how can you predict 6 to 12 months out or even 24 months out, and forecasting that as best as you can and thinking about triangulating those areas and saying, okay, are we in a hot category now that we just want to become a defining leader in? That's a separate strategy. Or do we want to define a new category? It certainly just depends on where they are and what they're selling and where the money's flowing.
I agree with that. And to an extent, how much do the customers, the buyers, really see this as a ring-fenced, separate need and therefore allocating a budget for? Because it's one thing for a bunch of vendors to say, hey, we're all a new area. But as you know, cybersecurity buyers are very cautious about anything that looks like marketing. And you're trying to tell me this is a new thing, but like it looks so much like this old thing that I already know about. It's just an adjacency. I really feel that's another factor in this equation. Let's talk a bit about a mainstay of cyber PR, and you just referenced it right at the top here, and that is threat detection, right? We know the threats are going to come. We just don't know what they are, how extensive, or when. And if you're lucky, your company probably has a labs team researching threats as they evolve. So I'm interested in your recommendations about how PR can work with the research team.
Oh my gosh, absolutely critical for marketing, corporate comms, PR, and the research organization to be completely intertwined. Absolute close partners. In fact, when I was at RSA this year, I was having a conversation with a good friend of mine who's a CMO for a very up-and-coming security company, and they were exhibiting at the show. We went for a walk, and we were talking about trends and things like that. And I had asked him, because he was saying he was running into some walls from a PR point of view. And I asked him, I said, do you have a research organization? He goes, we actually don't have one at the company. And I said, if you can pull together some budget and even just hire one threat researcher, one, that's all it takes. Someone who's in the wild, combing through what is happening out there as it relates to your product landscape, the threat vectors you solve for. It goes all the distance, because if you have that proprietary data, that telemetry, that is just solid gold for reporters, for the community. And if you really want to cut through marketing fluff and reach your technical buyers in a very authentic way, you need to be publishing original research from things that you're seeing, technical acumen that can reach those buyers and give you that credibility for like a grassroots upsale. And even now, it's so critical for so many reasons, because today, C-level decision makers, CISOs, CIOs, CTOs, they're actually looking at the research organizations of vendors when they're making their vendor choice consideration in cyber. Sometimes this comes in on an RFP. They'll ask, what is your research org? How big is it? What are you covering? Can I get that telemetry into the product? Can I access that telemetry, et cetera? So it's not just the technical practitioners. That consideration is going up to the board. So it helps communicators tell really great stories. It helps provide your company a lot of validation and trust. And if your research team and your communications team are not in sync, it's a huge missed opportunity.
Talk to me a bit about the mechanics of that then. You know, you have your labs team. I agree with you. If you don't have one, it really makes doing the PR for a cybersecurity company a lot harder compared to their competitors. But are you meeting with the labs team once a week? Like, talk to me about the actual mechanics inside the cybersecurity company to really extract that information quickly, because you've got to be quick to the punch with either the threat as it emerges, what is it, what's the impact? You've got to explain it. And so how do we extract that from the people who are doing the frontline research?
Absolutely. First of all, it has to be a top-down approach, meaning your C-level leader that oversees your research organization and your C-level marketing and or comms leader. First of all, that alignment needs to be at that level, because if they're not understood the value and the benefits for the business, for the brand, right? For go-to-market, the connection. Then from there, you treat it and you build it like a program. So what you do is you have it, it's like a thought leadership, research-driven thought leadership program. And then you have the right heads in the room. So you have a couple of folks from the research organization, usually your head of research, a couple of technical practitioners. You've got your PR head. You've got maybe someone who owns editorial, blog, all the owned media. And maybe you have a product marketing person. And what you're doing is, it is market-led. It's customer-led. So what does that mean? That means that if you have a research organization, there's all kinds of stuff that they could be looking at that they would find really interesting. And these are brilliant technicians that are going out there and know how to hunt threats and look for threats. But at the end of the day, You have to focus on what's actually going to move the needle for the business. And that's a hard conversation to have because it means you can't look at everything from a research point of view. You can't dig up everything. So you need to set very clear parameters and goals. And that needs to come from the business side of the house, fed into the research side to guide them. And then they go and they just let it rip. And there needs to be infrastructure in place, communications infrastructure, Slack channels or Teams channels, groups, intranet pages, and recurring meetings, recurring check-ins and reviews. And you treat it almost like, from a PR point of view, like an internal rapid response. They know that when something hits this level of discovery, or this level, you have tiers of discovery. When it's a juicy bit, because it checks those business boxes, boom, let's whip something together. Let's get a blog together. And then all of a sudden you can decide whether you're going to do full court press. We're going to pitch it. We need an executive spokesperson tied into the play. You run it strategically. You run it programmatically. But that starts with that understanding from both sides. We're actually doing this for the betterment of the business. And that means we have to give up some concessions in marketing and comms. Research has to give up some concessions. But when that aligns and it cooks, amazing stuff happens. And you see this with vendors in the space that are just always, right? First to move, first to announce, building that credibility. They're beloved at Black Hat and DEF CON. They're doing these. All that's coming out of those labs teams, those research teams.
Brilliant. I love the specificity from the top down, right down to you need a Slack channel. Everyone needs to be in this and you need to move fast. And it's a bit like a muscle, right? You got to build it up and get it. And then everyone's, oh, this really works. And then it sort of starts to become reinforcing. But yeah, strategically important for the business. I love that.
It's a brand building opportunity for these researchers. So if you think about the researchers and their careers, you know, it's rare that they stay at a company or any of us stay at one company for the rest of our lives anymore. What you're offering them is a platform. You're offering the researchers, the technical threat hunters, a platform to build their brand, which could open up tremendous career opportunities for them later on. So if you have hesitancy, sometimes that's the little honey that sweetens the deal to get some of the technical folks on board with this. And it's great, right? It's just a great thing for everybody at that point.
I think that motivation is critical. I mean, I remember when I worked with Sophos, we had Graham Cluley on F-Secure, we had Mika Huppinen, and, you know, these people are very well respected, but the engine room of a lot of that, they're sort of building their reputation, came from this very activity. And, you know, that does open doors for them personally and the business. And, you know, the business
Absolutely.
also needs to trust that labs team because those people are going to move on, but having those brand ambassadors is vital. I want to talk about data, and this is related to the labs team a little bit. I mean, you see lots of cybersecurity companies produce these sort of the state of reports. Look, fine. It's a playbook and it's well trodden. And there's multiple of them. The state of observability is produced by several different vendors, for example. What is your recommendation to sort of take that data, but update it so that you're not getting lost in the masses of the sea of state of reports?
Yeah, for sure. That's such a trend, right? The Verizon annual breach report, and some of them are kind of the mainstays that people still continue to read. But frankly, to me, it is such a legacy of cyber marketing that is decade plus old. And it's this idea that we have this giant monolithic anchor point of research and data, and that's going to carry us through the next 6 months. Well, it is in terms of the richness of the data, especially if the data is good. Let's just make an assumption the data is really good. There's going to be some folks and some old school customers that want or have the need to have the report in its entirety somewhere. Fine. To me, it's not even the issue of publishing the report, even though they can be really expensive and really time consuming. But to me, it's all about content merchandising that content. So what does that mean? We're going to take the totality of the data. We're going to take the totality of the data from this report. We're going to put it into lots of different formats. We're going to use our own research of what our customers know, what we know our customers like, what excites them, what's exciting the market, what's exciting press. We need, as marketers, research to understand where the trends are. Bubble up the data from that report that really dials in, and then get super creative. I mean, super creative about slicing and dicing that. Visuals are huge. Video formats right now are huge, not just on social for driving engagement, but what we're seeing is across the demand generation funnel, the buying journey and moving that prospect along from awareness to closed won. Video and multimedia, huge. And shorter, more succinct formats. Have your researcher go on, give 10, 15 seconds, get business of it, slap some colors, and let it roll. So it's shorter formats, merchandised across lots of different content channels, and you're sort of disseminating that data in a way that you're hitting people from different areas. And if you do it right, it can give you a lot of runway. One data set can give you lots and lots of runway. You're driving engagement on social. Your demand gen teams are happy. Your product marketing teams are happy. And then you can tie it all together with active pitching, like a great engaged active media program. So you're getting that top line awareness from the press coverage, tie it into presentations at Black Hat RSA, customer roadshows. So you're merchandising the data. You're not just letting a monolithic report do it for you.
I absolutely think that is a brilliant approach to using the data. And, you often have to make the argument to extract it because, that metadata doesn't just sort of exist. It needs some engineering time. But if you can slice that up and tie it into what's going on in the media, lots of different formats, make it as topical as possible. Sure, your state of report is great. It could be a demand gen asset. I agree with you. But from a comms perspective, you're going to work it a little bit differently. And I think your examples there were excellent. Now, product launches. Let's talk a little bit about that. What in your mind are the sort of must-dos and the sort of must-avoids when it comes to launching a cybersecurity product?
I have very strong thoughts about this.
Okay, good.
Very strong thoughts. In fact, when I was at Tenable, Tenable did a lot of great things from a marketing and comms point of view. But even for a company Tenable's size, a fairly large size vendor, there was an immaturity in how we launch things. After years of just slapping processes together and get it out the door, because speed is strategy. But sometimes we sacrifice doing the right thing by doing the fast thing. Part of what I did at Tenable before I left, my team and I, we came up with a completely new way to launch anything, any major launch, product launches, major corporate announcements and news, anything that was going to be market moving. You start with the philosophy around the launch. You have to be disciplined enough to almost tier out how important or how impactful the launch is. Because let's face it, everyone in the company that is tied to a particular launch, if you worked on that product, if you're the product marketer associated with that line of work, everyone gets very emotionally invested because it's an exciting thing, but not every launch deserves the entire full court press, every activity, every activation. That's exhausting. It exhausts the operational teams, and it's not a great use of resources. So to start, you should really have a conversation across marketing with your product and engineering teams and really talk about categorizing the tier of launch. Where does this product launch sit? Is this something that we can send a couple eves at a low tier launch? This is a quick little update. It's important, but we're actually just going to email our customers that use this version of the product and that's it. Or is this full court press, market moving, category defining, where we need every activation, full PR plan, global announcements, blah, blah, blah. You have to start with the operational rigor and defining that first. A lot of vendors don't get this right because they don't have that conversation. When you have that defined, now every launch, it becomes clear what bucket it falls into. And then you have a predefined bill of materials already set. Now, maybe each launch tweaks it a little bit, but now you have a place to start. You're not racking your brain and you're not going over and extending yourself for a launch that maybe only requires a very small communication or small outreach, so that when you need to do the big ones, you could really show up and show out and get the right noise, the right attention, have the right impact, because you're not using that as the default for everything. So that would be my biggest advice, is to take a step back, tier out the importance, and have a little operational rigor and alignment. Once you have that, it makes your launch process much, much smoother.
I like that advice. And I think the role of PR here is often when it comes to sort of products, there's disparate features and you've got to try and find some sort of cohesive narrative within that product. And it's exciting internally, particularly if you're if you're the PM, this is the thing that you've been working on. But PR has also got to reflect, well, look, this is exciting for us and it's a big deal for us and for our customers. From a media perspective, other companies have got this, right? This isn't breaking new ground, maybe. So you sometimes have to sort of reflect when you're making that decision. Hey, is this full court press? Is this a sort of a B-level? Like, how is this going to be received? And what is the media potential for this announcement? So sometimes that can feel uncomfortable internally, being like, I'm fully behind this launch, but with my PR hat on, this isn't the biggest one, and here's why. Whereas this other thing, look, you might not think this is a big feature, but I'm telling you, we should go big on this because this is really novel and no one else is doing it.
You know what, Morgan? I love that you said that, because tell me if you agree with this or not, but I feel like so much of our work in tech PR is setting expectations, right? We have to set expectations. And sometimes it's not always the right expectation, or a sales leader has this vision in his mind of what this is going to look like in terms of press coverage. But I think when you come back to that predefined tiering system, you can preset some expectations. It's not always perfect, and sometimes there needs to be a little switch here and there, but it actually helps having those conversations much easier. And then your PR team doesn't feel stressed that they have to deliver the world on the moon and the stars for something that really isn't that interesting to reporters to begin with.
That's right. I 100% agree. And I think that framing will just sort of ease the internal discussions. Let's talk a bit about exec visibility, like across the board for all startups right now. Your senior team are leaning into the execs. I don't know, open up LinkedIn. It's all about the senior people sort of showcasing what we know. As you said right at the beginning, how do you sort of break into that? It's maybe your senior leadership, thought leadership stuff. What advice do you have for cybersecurity companies wanting to promote their senior leadership?
Thought leadership is so critical for brand building, for marketing, and for winning in security or any other highly competitive category. And your executive team, those are your star players in your thought leadership pool. Also, maybe your high profile researchers and some of your other technical voices and evangelists. But I think what sometimes happens, especially now with the influencerization of the business world, you have the influencerization of LinkedIn, and you have some pretty star power players in the cyber industry, like George Kurtz, for example, at CrowdStrike, that have these huge platforms. And I think when you have up and coming cyber companies, you have CEOs, founders, sometimes there's a bit of a chase, right? Chasing that celebrity, or feeling even from an authentic place of, I have some really good things to say, I want to say them. But the biggest mistake I think cyber companies make from thought leadership and executive visibility is that they put the focus on the executive first and not on the brand. Whereas it should be focused on the brand and building a great company with a great product. And then your executive is essentially the spokesperson or the primary face for that. And as a result of that company doing great work and the product solving incredible problems, that tide rises the profile of the executive. And then that executive can become like a George Kurtz or whoever. But if they're focused too much on themselves and their profile, you're kind of missing the point, right? Because you have this company to build. And so I think the way that you do that is by building a roster of executive spokespeople aligned to different messaging components. What are the goals of the business? What are we trying to do? And what messages do we need to deliver into the market at the right place and time to move the business forward? And then which of our executives really maps to that? And that looks different for every company. There's no one way to do it. But if it's focused on the brand building, their profile, their opinions will rise with the tide rather than focus entirely on that executive's opinion. And that can be hard because sometimes there's some ego there. And sometimes it's just kind of stubborn naivety. And especially if you have like engineering-based founders, technical-based founders, sometimes there's a adjustment or an education around how this works in terms of building their brand and building the company's brand at the same time. So that would be my biggest sort of takeaway is focus on the brand and your executive tier will rise with it, with that thought leadership program.
You mentioned there sort of influencerization, which is a word I can't really say, but there are a lot of influencers within cybersecurity. Yes, some of them, they work for a particular vendor. So as a startup, we can't really engage them, but there are others who have their own audience. What's your take on sort of engaging influencers so that you can tap into their audiences?
There's a really interesting transition, or I would say evolution, of what influencerization looks like in security right now. And it has lots of faces. Your own platform and becoming your own media through LinkedIn, through TikTok, through video and YouTube. It has really changed what cyber influencerization or influencer marketing used to look like. I mean, back in the day, I say this once again, 10, 15 years ago, you had someone that, like a Kevin Mitnick, rest in peace, who used to be a high-profile hacker, they would be sort of available to be an evangelist for a vendor for a fee or whatever. You'd be lucky if you got one of those or got someone to sign a book at your booth at RSA. Nowadays, that whole ecosystem looks tremendously different. And there's lots and lots of voices in that ecosystem. But I think that in order to engage them authentically, you have to think less as influencing them from a PR point of view, the way we pitch and influence journalists. And I would actually advise that you look at a lot of these influencers as more marketing partners, content partners. Don't be afraid to spend money on influencers. Have an influencer budget, because today, the ones that are going to move the needle are actually more content partners for you than they are, hey, I'm going to pitch an influencer a story and hope they cover it on their TikTok or hope they cover it in their next LinkedIn roundup. That's not happening. When I was at RSA this year, I was speaking with lots of PR leaders at vendors. Almost every single one of them had either for the first time a dedicated influencer budget in the six-figure realm, or had doubled or tripled their influencer budget from the previous year. And then you have influencers that are like younger, the Gen Z sort of young generation of cyber people, cyber practitioners that are tapping into a whole new way of working and thinking. That's valid. You have influencers that are technical, that have been around the space for a long time. You know, the Krebs of the world, Brian Krebs of the world, that's valid. But then you have this really interesting sphere of independent analysts, which are changing the AR game completely. Guys like Francis Odom, I got to give Francis a shout. So I think if you're willing to spend money, have honest conversations about what you're looking to accomplish and see if their audience and their platform makes sense to you, and then put a program together. Do a pilot and see. But to me, the authenticity actually comes with not ignoring the money piece, having an honest conversation about fees and treating it as a marketing partnership.
I mean, this is how they're making their money. I mean, they need to be paid in order to sort of, to engage. And that can feel a little sort of uncomfortable, right? But they have to maintain their authenticity and their independence. But all the cybersecurity companies we're talking to now are starting out having budgets for this, either scaling their influencer marketing programs or taking the first steps down there. And there's a ready audience to do it. And, the content is great. The content is engaging and really interesting, gets loads of comments, and you can use it in lots of different ways. So I think this is really exciting. It's a great overview. Just as we wrap this section, what other advice do you have for cybersecurity companies out there when it comes to PR?
I was actually talking with somebody about this week. First, this year, everybody should be revisiting their agency models. Everybody should be revisiting their agency models. I think gone are the days of the single AOR for a company. That's not to say that large-scale agencies with large regional reach, they don't do good work, of course. Lots of them do really great work. But not everyone needs a large-scale AOR. In fact, sometimes it's a couple of small agencies and a small handful of consultants in region can actually move the needle for you cost effectively from a PR point of view, brand building, earned press, share of voice, the whole thing, than a big AOR. So I would say revisit your agency outlook and consider some more creative structure there. Number one. Number two, I think that storytelling is very interesting now. It takes lots of different forms. And I think PR people, at the end of the day, whether you're in support or you're in-house at a firm, the PR should be driving the needs of the business forward. The end. Full stop. And you can do that and you can storytell in lots of different ways. You don't have to be caught in the rat race of getting lots and lots of coverage. If I'm hiring a PR agency, I'm not going to be mapping them to volumes and volumes of coverage in terms of their performance. I'm going to be thinking about quality over quantity and more creative ways to get our story into the market, to get our story into the hands of our stakeholders beyond, just spray and pray or always being on broadcast or always being on CNN or whatever the case is. It's about setting expectations internally. And if you can find more creative ways to take the PR function and more deeply integrate it into your demand gen programs, into your product marketing strategies, you actually reduce the pressure that PR is usually held to for the delivery of all that coverage. And you can demonstrate a lot of value by taking that content and weaving it into these programs that are actually moving pipeline forward. So get creative, take a look at your agency spend and your agency structure, and think about storytelling outside of the box, because PR is PR. It doesn't have to look the way it used to. And the best companies out there are changing how they do that, and it's working.
Excellent advice there. I really do think that the agency models are totally changing and companies are becoming very open to working with fractional leaders, small boutique firms on different models. And I love the conversation you're having about measurement and impact and not necessarily sort of vanity metrics around the sort of volume of coverage, but actually driving measurable awareness and then ultimately pipeline. I think it is critical if you can. So Nick Lagalante is the founder of Fractional 360, which is a cybersecurity marketing and PR consultancy. Nick, thanks for joining us here. If people want to get in touch with you, where should they go?
Thank you so much for having me, Morgan. If you'd like to connect, I'm super active on LinkedIn. You can find me at Nick Lagalante. I'm easy to find, and I would love to connect.
Wonderful. Nick, thanks for your time today. Really enjoyed that conversation, and we'll look forward to talking to you again soon.
Me too, Morgan. Thank you so much. Take care.